A shepherd in the hills above the Sea of Galilee 2,000 years ago carried three things with him when he moved his flock from one pasture to the next: his staff, his pouch, and a skin of milk that was already becoming something else. The skin, made from the stomach of a young goat, was not just a container. It was a fermentation vessel. The rennet that naturally remained in the stomach lining of the kid was the enzyme that would curdle the milk over the hours of walking, separating it into solid curds and liquid whey. By the time the shepherd stopped for the evening, the milk in his skin had become a soft, tangy, protein-dense, fresh cheese. He had not done anything to make this happen. He had simply carried the milk in the right container and walked. This accidental discovery that milk carried in a stomach skin curdled into something nutritionally superior to the milk it began as, is one of the founding technologies of human civilization. Cheese extended the usable life of milk from hours to months. It concentrated the nutrition of milk into a portable, storable, highly bioavailable form. And the cheese that Galilean shepherds made 2,000 years ago was not the pale, mild, processed product in the refrigerated section of a modern supermarket. It was something so nutritionally dense that modern food science is still struggling to produce an equivalent. Let me tell you exactly what it was and exactly why it matters. The milk came from goats and sheep, not cows. This distinction is critical because goat and sheep milk have a fundamentally different composition from cow milk. And those differences translate directly into the nutritional profile of the cheese made from them. Sheep milk, the primary dairy animal of ancient Israel, contains 6 to 8% fat, compared to 3 to 4% in modern cow milk. It contains approximately 5% protein, compared to 3% in cow milk. This means that sheep milk is, by weight, approximately twice as protein-dense and twice as fat-dense as cow milk. When you make cheese from it, concentrating the protein and fat by removing the whey, the resulting cheese has a protein content of roughly 25 to 30% by weight. For comparison, a standard block of commercial cheddar, the most protein-dense, widely available cheese in a modern supermarket, has a protein content of approximately 25 grams per 100 grams. That is 25%. So far, they're comparable. But the story is more complex. The fat in sheep milk is structurally different from the fat in cow milk. Sheep milk fat globules are smaller and more easily digested. Sheep milk has a higher proportion of short and medium-chain fatty acids, which are absorbed directly from the gut without requiring pancreatic enzymes or bile acids. This makes sheep milk fat significantly more digestible than cow milk fat, particularly for people with compromised digestive systems. Sheep milk also has a different casein protein structure from cow milk. The beta-casein in sheep milk is predominantly the A2 form, the ancestral form present in all mammals before a genetic mutation in European dairy cattle produced the A1 form approximately 8,000 years ago. Research from the University of Auckland and multiple subsequent studies has found that A1 beta-casein is significantly more associated with digestive distress, inflammation, and immune reactions than A2 beta-casein. The shepherds of Galilee were making cheese from A2 sheep milk. It was the form of dairy protein that the human digestive system had been processing for 10,000 years of cheese-making history. The curdling of milk into cheese requires an enzyme that cuts a specific protein, kappa-casein, causing the casein proteins to aggregate into a solid mass. That enzyme is rennet. In the ancient world, rennet came from the stomach lining of young ruminants, lambs, kids, calves, who were still nursing. The stomach of a nursing ruminant produces large quantities of chymosin, the primary curdling enzyme, to digest its mother's milk. When the dried or fresh stomach lining was submerged in milk, the enzyme transferred to the milk and began curdling it. This was not discovered by deliberate experiment. It was discovered by accident, by a shepherd or pastoral family who stored milk in a stomach pouch and discovered that the contents had transformed into something solid and sour and remarkable. The discovery was so significant that it spread across the entire pastoral world simultaneously. Every culture that kept ruminant animals developed cheese independently, using the same basic technology within a similar historical period. But the rennet from a young ruminant stomach was not the only source of curdling enzymes available in ancient Israel. The fig, abundant in Galilee, contains ficin, a proteolytic enzyme that curdles milk by a different mechanism. Wild thistle flowers contain cinerases that curdle milk. Nettles contain compounds that promote curdling. The Galilean shepherd had access to multiple curdling agents from the landscape around him, and each produced a slightly different cheese, different texture, different flavor profile, different bacterial composition. The bacteria in the milk and on the equipment were not controlled. They were ambient, the natural microbial community of the hillside, the shepherd's hands, the goat's teat. Every batch of cheese was inoculated by a diverse community of organisms that included dozens of lactobacillus, leuconostoc, and streptococcus species. That diversity is what modern artisan cheesemakers call terroir. The flavor of the cheese reflects the microbial community of the place where it was made. The shepherds of Galilee were making terroir cheese without knowing the concept, and the microbial diversity in that cheese was, from a gut health perspective, extraordinary. Cheese appears in the Bible in contexts that tell us it was a significant food, not a rarity, not a luxury, but a daily staple of pastoral households. In 1 Samuel 17:18, Jesse sends David to the battlefield at Elah, not only with grain and bread for his brothers, but with 10 cheeses for the commander. Cheese as a gift to a military commander, not wine, not fine bread, but cheese, indicates its value as a concentrated, portable, high-nutrition food suited to the demands of soldiers in the field. In 2 Samuel 17:29, when David and his people are fleeing from Absalom, the supplies brought to them by Barzillai and others include, alongside grain and honey and sheep, cheese of cattle, curds from the dairy animals. In a crisis situation, cheese was the emergency food, dense, portable, non-perishable. In Job 10:10, Job uses the curdling of milk into cheese as a metaphor for the creative process of God forming human beings from the primordial state. Did you not pour me out like milk and curdle me like cheese? Job is not reaching for an obscure metaphor. He is using the most recognizable transformation in his world, liquid milk becoming solid cheese, to describe becoming. The Mishnah, the rabbinic compilation of Jewish oral law, devotes significant space to the laws governing cheese. Which rennet is acceptable, the minimum aging before a hard cheese is considered distinct from milk, the rules governing cheese made by non-Israelites. This level of legal attention indicates that cheese was not a marginal food in the ancient Jewish diet. It was central. It was daily. It was the dairy protein source for a pastoral people who did not slaughter their animals casually. The living animal was an agricultural asset, worth far more than the meat of a dead one. Milk, yogurt, and cheese were the sustainable dairy economy, and they were made, consumed, and regulated with extraordinary care. Fresh cheese, the soft, white, whey-rich curd made from a single day's curdling, was one product. Aged cheese was another category entirely. To age cheese in first-century Galilee was to store it in the cool of an underground chamber or cave, rolled in salt if salt was available, wrapped in cloth, placed on stone shelves, and left to dry and develop for weeks or months. During aging, the diverse bacterial community in the cheese continued to work. They produced lactic acid, which dried and firmed the cheese. They produced proteolytic enzymes, which broke down the casein proteins into shorter peptide chains and free amino acids, pre-digesting the protein in a way that made it more bioavailable. They produced lipase enzymes, which broke down the fat into free fatty acids that provided the complex flavor of aged cheese. The proteolysis, the bacterial predigestion of the protein, is a critical nutritional point. Whole casein protein requires significant digestive effort. The pepsin in the stomach must break it down. The pancreatic enzymes must continue the digestion. The brush border enzymes of the small intestine must complete it. For people with compromised digestive systems, whole casein can be difficult to absorb efficiently. Aged cheese has done much of that work already. The bacterial proteolysis during aging has produced peptide chains short enough for direct absorption through the gut wall. The protein in aged sheep milk cheese is, in a functional sense, a pre-digested protein that is absorbed more efficiently than the same protein in fresh milk. And then there are the bioactive peptides. Research over the past 20 years has identified dozens of bioactive peptides in aged cheese that are produced during bacterial proteolysis. These peptides have measurable biological activity: antihypertensive effects, antithrombotic effects, antimicrobial effects, immunomodulatory effects. They are, in the language of functional nutrition, pharmaceutical-grade compounds produced naturally by the microbial fermentation of milk protein. The shepherd who aged his cheese in a cave in Galilee was not making a health food. He was making food that would keep and that would be easy to carry. The health effects were a byproduct of a process optimized for preservation. Walk into any modern supermarket cheese section. Read the labels. You will find protein content. You will find fat content. You will find sodium. You will find a list of ingredients that, in many commercial cheeses, includes ingredients that were not in any cheese until the 20th century. Emulsifying salts, preservatives, artificial coloring, cellulose to prevent caking. What you will not find on the label: microbial diversity, bacterial species count, bioactive peptide content, pre-digested protein percentage. Modern commercial cheese is made from pasteurized milk, a necessary safety measure at industrial scale, but one that kills not only the pathogenic bacteria that pasteurization is designed to eliminate, but also the diverse community of beneficial organisms that give traditional aged cheese its probiotic properties. It is then inoculated with a standardized culture, 1, 2, or 3 bacterial strains selected for predictable, consistent results. Not the dozen or more ambient strains of a traditional shepherd's cheese. One predictable starter culture. It is aged in controlled environments, constant temperature, constant humidity, precisely managed, that produce a consistent product but eliminate the environmental variables that create microbial diversity. The result is a cheese with protein content comparable to traditional cheese, fat content comparable, calcium content comparable, probiotic content near zero. The pasteurization and controlled culturing has eliminated the microbial community that made traditional cheese a functional probiotic food. Bioactive peptide content significantly lower. The brief and standardized aging process does not allow the degree of proteolysis that traditional long aging in ambient bacterial environments produces. You are buying the macronutrient profile of traditional cheese without the functional nutrition that made traditional cheese remarkable. You cannot replicate a Galilean hillside in your kitchen, but you can get closer than the supermarket will take you. The starting point is raw milk, if you have legal access to it in your jurisdiction. Raw milk contains the natural bacterial community that traditional cheese requires. If raw milk is not available, the next best option is pasteurized, but non-homogenized whole milk. Homogenization, which forces the fat globules through high pressure to produce a uniform mixture, alters the fat structure in ways that affect both texture and digestibility. If you are using sheep milk or goat milk, which you should if available, the protein and fat content will be closer to the original than anything from a cow. The A2-beta-casein, the smaller fat globules, the more digestible structure, the simplest traditional cheese, Labneh, which is the fresh-strained yogurt cheese of the Middle East and is the direct descendant of the fresh cheese made throughout ancient Israel, requires only yogurt and cloth. Take full-fat yogurt, made from sheep or goat milk if possible, from a brand with live cultures. Line a colander with clean cloth. Pour in the yogurt. Tie the cloth at the top and hang it over a bowl in the refrigerator. Leave it for 12 to 24 hours. The whey will drip through the cloth into the bowl below. What remains in the cloth is a thick, creamy, tangy, fresh cheese. This is Labneh. This is what Mary served with bread and olive oil at the morning meal. This is what the shepherd carried in his pack. For a longer-aged product, form the drained Labneh into small balls, roll them in dried herbs, thyme, za'atar, dried oregano, and submerge them in olive oil in a jar. They will keep for 3 to 4 months at room temperature. Over time, they develop complexity as the bacteria in the cheese continue to ferment slowly in the oil. After 2 months, the protein content is higher, the texture is firmer, and the flavor is incomparably richer than anything you will find in a supermarket. The shepherd who carried his goat stomach full of milk up the hills of Galilee 2,000 years ago was not making a wellness product. He was making food. Practical food for a practical life in a practical landscape. But what he made contained something that we have lost and are only now measuring well enough to mourn. A microbially diverse food made from sheep milk, with live cultures from the ambient bacterial community of the Galilean hillside, aged slowly in the cool of a stone chamber, with protein that had been pre-digested by weeks of bacterial proteolysis into forms the human gut could receive directly and efficiently. We have replaced it with a product made from A1 cow milk, pasteurized to eliminate the bacteria, inoculated with one standardized culture, and aged for a fraction of the time in an industrial environment designed to eliminate the variability that made traditional cheese alive. And we have a population with osteoporosis despite eating dairy their entire lives, with digestive disorders triggered by dairy, with inflammatory conditions that traditional dairy did not produce in the populations that ate it. The food changed. The marketing didn't tell you. The label didn't tell you. The shepherd knew something that the food industry has profitably forgotten. Cheese is not a macronutrient delivery vehicle. It is a living food, a fermented food, a microbially complex, enzymatically active, biologically alive food that participates in the health of the person who eats it in ways that a standardized, pasteurized, shelf-stable product cannot replicate. The protein content is comparable. The wisdom is not. Find a good full-fat yogurt with live cultures, sheep or goat if possible. Hang it in cloth for 24 hours. Roll the result in za'atar and olive oil. Eat it with sourdough bread made from ancient grain. You have just eaten the breakfast of first-century Galilee, the breakfast of shepherds and prophets and the family in Nazareth who couldn't afford a lamb but knew how to make their milk into something that would last. If this changed how you see the dairy in your kitchen, share it tonight. Subscribe for more of the food wisdom that the ancient world preserved and the modern world is still learning to recover. Tell me in the comments. Do you make Labneh? Have you eaten sheep milk cheese? Drop it below. I'll see you in the next one.